Canto 7, Chapter 1, Text number 9. Jyotir Adir Iva Bhati Sangatana Vivichyate Vidantyatmanam Atmastam Maitiva Kavayon Tataha Jyotir Adir Iva Bhati Sangatana Vivichyate Vidantya Atmanam Vidyantyatmanam Atmastam Maitiva Kavayon Tataha Jyotir Adir Eva Bhati Sangatana Vivichyate Jyotir Adir Eva Bhati Sangatana Vivichyate Vidantyatmanam Atmastam Matitva Kavayon Tataha Jyotir Adir Iva Bhati Sangatana Vivichyate Vidantyatmanam Atmastam Mativa Kavayon Tataha Jyotir Adir Iva Bhati Sangatana Vivichyate Vidantyatmanam Atmastam Mativa Kavayon Tataha Jyotir Adir Iva Bhati Sangatana Vivichyate Vidantyatmanam Atmastam Mativa Kavayon Tataha Jyotihi, fire, Adihi, and other elements, Iva, just as, Abhati, appear, Sangatat, from the bodies of demigods and others, Na, not, Vivichyate, are distinguished, Vidanti, perceive, Atmanam, the supreme, the super soul, Atma stam, situated in the heart, Matitva, by discerning, Kavayoho, expert thinkers, Antataha, within. Translation: the all-pervading personality of Godhead exists within the heart of every living being, and an expert thinker can perceive how he, that's personality of Godhead, is present there to a large or small extent. Just as one can understand the supply of fire in wood, the water in a water pot, or the sky within a pot, One can understand whether a living entity is a demon or a demigod by understanding that living entity's devotional performances. A thoughtful man can understand how much a person is favored by the Supreme Lord by seeing his actions. A long purport. In Bhagavad Gita 10:41, the Lord says, Yad Yad Vibhuti Mat Sattvam Srimad Urjitam Eva Va Tat Tat Eva Eva Vagachat Tvam Mama Tejom Cha Sambhavam. Know that all beautiful, glorious, and mighty creations spring from but a spark of my splendor. We have the practical experience of seeing that one person is able to do very wonderful things, whereas another cannot do those same things and cannot even do things that require only a little common sense. Therefore, how much a devotee has been favored by the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be tested by the activities the devotee has performed. In Bhagavad Gita 10:10, the Lord also says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami bodhi yogam tam yenamam upayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and who worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. This is very practical. A teacher instructs the student if the student is capable of taking more and more instructions. Otherwise, in spite of being instructed by the teacher, the student cannot make strides in his understanding. This has nothing to do with partiality. When Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami bodhi yogam tam, this indicates that Krishna is prepared to give bhakti yoga to everyone, but one must be capable of receiving it. That is the secret. Thus, when a person exhibits wonderful devotional activities, a thoughtful man understands that Krishna has been more favorable to this devotee. Paragraph. This is not difficult to understand, but envious persons do not accept that Krishna has bestowed his favor upon a particular devotee in accordance with his advanced position. Such foolish persons become envious and try to minimize an advanced devotee's activities. That is not Vaishnavism. A Vaishnava should appreciate the service rendered to the Lord by other Vaishnavas. Therefore, a Vaishnava is described in Srimad Bhagavatam as Nirmatsara. Vaishnavas are never envious of other Vaishnavas or of anyone else, and therefore they are called Nirmatsaranam Satam. Paragraph. As Bhagavad Gita informs us, one can understand how one is saturated with Sattva-guna, Rajaguna, or Tamaguna. In the examples given herewith, fire represents the mood of goodness. One can understand the constitution of a container for wood, petroleum, or other inflammable substances by the quantity of the fire. Similarly, water represents Rajoguna, the mode of passion. A small skin and the vast Atlantic Ocean both contain water, and by seeing the quantity of water in a container, one can understand the size of the container. The sky represents the mode of ignorance. The sky is present in a small earthen pot and also in outer space. Thus, by proper judgment, one can see who is a devata or demigod, and who is an asura, yaksha, or rakshasa, according to the quantities of sattva guna, rajoguna, and tamaguna. One cannot judge whether a person is a devata, an asura, or a rakshasa by seeing him, but a sane man can understand this by the activities such a person performs. A general description is given in the Padma Purana, Vishnu Bhakta Smrto Daiva Asuras Tad Viparyaya. A devotee of Lord Vishnu is a demigod, whereas an asura or yaksha is just the opposite. An asura is not a devotee of Lord Vishnu. Instead, for his sense gratification, he is a devotee of the demigods, bhutas, pretas, and so on. Thus, one can judge who is a devata, who is a rakshasa, and who is an asura by how they conduct their activities. Paragraph. The word atmanam in this verse means paramatmanam. The paramatma, or super soul, is situated in the core of everyone's heart, antata. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 1861. Ishara sarvabhutanam hrideshe arjuna tishtati. The Ishvara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead being situated in everyone's heart, gives direction to everyone in terms of one's capabilities in taking the instructions. The instructions of Bhagavad Gita are open to everyone, but some people understand them properly, whereas others understand them so improperly that they cannot even believe in the existence of Krishna. Although reading Krishna's book, although the Gita says Sri Bhagavan Vacha, indicating that Krishna spoke, they cannot understand Krishna. This is due to their misfortune or incapability, which is caused by Rajoguna and Tamoguna, the modes of passion and ignorance. It is because of these modes that they cannot even understand Krishna, whereas an advanced devotee like Arjuna understands him and glorifies him, saying, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram Paramam Bhavan. You are the Supreme Brahman, the Supreme Abode and Purifier. Krishna is open to everyone, but one needs the capability to understand him. Paragraph. By external features, one cannot understand who is favored by Krishna and who is not. According to one's attitude, Krishna becomes one's direct advisor, or Krishna becomes unknown. This is not Krishna's partiality. It is receptiveness. Whether one be a devata, asura, yaksha, or rakshasa, Krishna's quality is proportionately exhibited. This proportionate exhibition of Krishna's power is misunderstood by less intelligent men to be Krishna's partiality, but actually is no such thing. Krishna is equal to everyone, and according to one's ability to receive the favor of Krishna, one advances in Krishna consciousness. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives a practical example in this connection. In the sky, there are many luminaries. At night, even in darkness, the moon is extremely brilliant and can be directly perceived. The sun is also extremely brilliant when covered by clouds. However, these luminaries are not distinctly visible. Similarly, the more one advances in sattva guna, the more his brilliance is exhibited by devotional service. But the more one is covered by rajoguna and tamoguna, the less visible his brilliance, or he is covered by these qualities. The visibility of one's qualities does not depend on the partiality of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, semicolon. It is due to various coverings in different proportions. Thus, one can understand how far he has advanced in terms of sattva guna and how much he is covered by rajaguna and tamaguna. Very elaborate explanation. The conclusion is very straightforward. The example of the sun shining, it's equally shining, whether maybe even at night the sun is shining, but we're not seeing the sun in the daytime. The sun is maybe covered by clouds, or the moon may be covered by clouds, but their shiningness is not different. They're not partial. They're shining. And the perception of that shiningness is going to be dependent upon if there's some obstruction or not. And so the some obstruction or not is in conditioned life has everything to do with the modes of nature. And from the modes of nature, then different coverings. That means different bodies, different body types, different species, different varieties within species. Even within the same species, then varieties between one member of that species and another, all are having everything to do with these three modes of nature. So the three modes of nature covering the living entity is not an indication of partiality. It has everything to do with the disposition of the living entity towards the personality of Godhead, or the disposition of living entity towards the type of enjoyment they would like, separate from the personality of Godhead. And then, so therefore, it appears to the uneducated person, it appears partiality, which was, the question at the beginning of the chapter, beginning of the canto. Why does it appear like there's partiality? Well, it just appears to be partiality. Here's really what's going on. Living entities are covered. And according to their covering, like the sun is shining, whether there's a cloud covering or not, like the moon is shining, whether there's a cloud covering or not, the Supreme Lord is kind to every living entity. And the living entity's receptivity is going to manifest behavior and speech and attitudes and feelings and so forth, according to that covering, according to the modes of nature. So one could argue, well, wait a minute. The modes of nature are features of Prakriti, and Prakriti is under the influence, is under the control of the personality of Godhead. So he is partial. Some are influenced by this mode, some by that mode. So he's partial. He's not partial. The mode that's covering the living entity has everything to do with the regard that living entity has for Krishna. And importantly, Krishna is forever inviting the living entity to become free from their coverings and to have unobstructed vision of him, unobstructed relationship with him. Bhaktisiddhanta's language is, the transcendental autocrat is forever inviting the conditioned soul to join with him in loving service mood. So supposing one says no, then the Supreme Lord doesn't interfere because living entity has partial independence. And if he says no, then it's no. Now, but there's consequences for saying no. the consequence is being covered by that potency that permits one to forget. That means even in the mode of goodness or mode of passion or the mode of ignorance, there's ignorance, that is forgetfulness. And in that forgetfulness, there is variety. And with that variety appears to partiality. But it's not the Lord is partial. This is just saying the same thing again. Because the question at the beginning of the canto. Spend a little bit of time. Spend a little bit of time going over the metaphor that's here. The mode of goodness, mode of passion, the mode of ignorance metaphor. Fire, metaphorically, is the mode of goodness. And fire, there's fire within wood, there's fire within petroleum, there's fire within other inflammable objects, and there's degrees of that fire. I mean, there's other besides degrees of fire, but some are more flammable, some are less flammable. So it may appear there's some partiality towards the more flammable one. But it's, the mode that is being here compared to fire has everything to do with, the covering has everything to do with the regard, the mode of goodness. The degree of the mode of goodness has everything to do with the regard of living entity towards the Supreme. The more that you turn your attention away from light, the more there's darkness. So it can be fullest bright light, but that's a free will choice. So using this example of fire, because that's right within the verse itself, there's degrees of mode of goodness. Using fire as a metaphor for goodness. Then the mode of passion is water. So there's qualitative and quantitative. Prabhupada's giving the example of a skin, meaning like a container that carries water. And then there's the vast ocean. And so there's quantitative, and there may also be qualitative, pure versus contaminated, etc., etc. So it's not that the Supreme is partial, but according to the mode of passion, then the perception and understanding and ability to relate properly to the Supreme is going to be different. And as the Supreme relates differently, according to the covering, it looks like partiality. And same, the idea with sky, small quantity of sky, big quantity of sky, the same sky. And sky can be adulterated and sky can be pure. And so there's degrees and qualities of the covering of sky or the covering of ignorance. But that's due to free will choices of the living entity and behaviors and actions taken in the past, thus coverings, which looks to an observer that doesn't understand the background behind things, that the Lord is partial. The Lord is not partial. He bestows coverings according to our free will choices and our previous actions, and so we get coverings. And it's not his partiality, but there's a better understanding and a poorer understanding depending upon past activities. And so the good news, because this chapter does discuss it, the good news is devotional service has the potency to cleanse the coverings, cleanse the modes of nature. Who knows the verse from Canto 1, Chapter 2 about the modes of ignorance and passion being diminished by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam? Tado rajas tamo bhava kama lobhadaya shye cheta etaranadvitam stitvam sattve prasidati. Bhagavatam gives the answer by hearing topics about the personality of Godhead, Bhagavad Gita, or the topics of Bhagavan from the book Bhagavat, from the person Bhagavata, then the modes of nature become diminished. In fact, they can be nashta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya. Nityam bhagavata sevaya. By rendering service to the person and book Bhagavata, then the abhadras are reduced and eventually, ultimately, completely cleansed away. That's the process of reversing the apparent partiality or changing the influence of the modes of nature upon us. Generally speaking, it's a gradual process because we didn't get covered overnight. We've been at it for a long time. And there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of stockpile, a big warehouse of reactions coming to us from our past involvement in material nature. So it doesn't take place swiftly, generally speaking. It's possible because the bhakti process is very, very powerful. But our conditioned tendency is also very powerful. And so our tendency is to revert. Therefore, we have vidhis. We have scripturally imposed or recommended regulations that help to purify the modes of nature, purify the mind, purify the senses, purify the soul, to restore the original consciousness. Now, doing that is also a free will choice, just like being covered is a free will choice. The product of the covering is a product of free will choices over who knows what period of time, extended, unlimited period of time. Reversing the process is not a jiffy. It would be nice if it was, but it's gradual. In one sense, it's very swift compared to the indirect process or gradual elevation. That is to say, the bhakti process is especially powerful in terms of cleansing and in that cleansed condition revealing, like just when clouds are gone, the direct sunlight is very strong. And when the clouds are there, direct sunlight may be diminished. The influence of the direct sunlight will be diminished because of the cloud covering between us and the sun. So this is a very simple, it's a little involved, the metaphor is involved, but it's a very simple explanation in response to the question that was put to Narada, or to Shukadeva by Maharaj Parikshit. He wants to know, is the Lord partial? The long purport, and the concept, the explanation given will continue, but it's building a case. The whole case, that this first chapter is very interesting. The deliverance of Shishupal and all those things. Who's eligible for that? And why did the Lord show some special favor to Shishupal? Looked like special favor. He's a bad guy, but he got a lot of mercy. So looks like partial. He was such a bad guy. How did it take place? So it's there's purification. I mean, rather than preempt what's going to come up, his mind, Shishupal, in principle, his mind was absorbed in bad way, but in his inimical attitude, his mind was absorbed. His mind absorbed in Krishna was purifying. The tendency for bad attitude towards Krishna was there, but his bad attitude helped him become very focused in enmity towards Krishna. Narada reasons these two. Kamsa, who is fixed in fear, and Shishupal, who is fixed in enmity. Those are two very powerful forces to help one fix one's mind on something. So because Krishna was the object their mind was fixed upon, they were the recipient of great mercy. And those that are practitioners of bhakti may not be able to think of Krishna as intensely and as consistently as Kamsa and Shishupal thought of Krishna. But the end result is not just think of Krishna, but think of Krishna favorably and serve him. And so bhakti has its own special power if done properly. And so it's good to remember what's the purpose behind what we're doing. I was thinking about, your lifestyle here in the ashram. And life is very simple. For some people, maybe too simple. Like, I gotta have complexity. I gotta have more stuff and more of this and more of that. I gotta have complexity. My mind is restless. However, that simplicity has its beauty. From the evening classes, I was thinking about this particular topic in relation to the gopis. They were very simple. They weren't wealthy. They didn't have resources. They didn't have lots of things. But what they did have was devotion to Krishna, and how many lifetimes of devotion to Krishna brought them to that elevated position, who can say? Like Shukadev Goswami says about the cowherd boys, countless lifetimes of devotion to Krishna entitle them to be with Krishna. They were with Krishna all day long. They were with Krishna all day long. They were with Krishna at night, but they were with Krishna all day long, day after day after day. I mean, supposing one can see Krishna. They weren't just to see Krishna, they were playing with Krishna all day long, day after day, no break. And their love for Krishna grew and grew and grew. What to speak of then the gopis? But it wasn't just they had devotion for Krishna. Look what they did this past time we heard. For 1 month, they ate 1 meal a day of unspiced, unsalted khichdi 1 time a day, and took bath in the freezing cold river Jamuna water up to their necks every day. And they worshiped, because they didn't have wealth, they worshiped Katyayani in the mood of a giver of bhakti to Krishna, to have Krishna as their husband. And they had most miraculous of all, they had no envy towards one another. They had the same desire. They wanted to marry the same boy. And there they were, no enmity towards one another. Unbelievable. Such great austerity that Krishna appreciated. He appreciated very much. And so he came and fulfilled their desire. he became married to them in course of time, but he reciprocated with them as one who has that kind of loving relationship. It's really wonderful. He didn't do that with everyone. He did it with them. Acharyas explained not all gopis became Krishna's wives. They wanted Krishna as their husband. Not all of them became Krishna's wives, but they underwent this. Those who underwent this particular vrata, he made this promise to them. They became their wives. And very intriguing arrangement of how he became their wife and became their husband. So it's not Krishna's partiality. Looks like, but it's not. Their regard for Krishna, living entities' regard for Krishna, he reciprocates with, and it's true. Same for us. So living a life of simplicity, that's good, because living a life of complexity, there's abundant distraction. Then comes all the how to deal with all the complexity and be Krishna conscious. There's all of those questions. Live a life of simplicity, and all of that complexity is taken away. It's a privilege to live a life of simplicity, and in living a life of simplicity, it's one of the characteristics of one in the mode of goodness, and it's certainly one of the characteristics of one in devotion. They're not attracted to complexity. Now, in Vedic life, one who has deep devotion for Krishna, then one becomes interested in details. Here's a really easy one. Mother Jamuna and her cookbook. Details. So, her devotion was way up there, and her cooking aptitude was also way up there. In the cooking aptitude, she had details and details and details. I heard many ISKCON devotees are familiar with Janavi Harrison, who is a wonderful kirtan singer. When she was a young girl, she had Jamuna's association. One nice story she narrated. Jamuna tested her. She made something, and she wanted Janavi to identify what were the ingredients just from tasting, just like on the tip of her tongue, a little morsel, describe the ingredients. She told the story that she wanted to make something really, really nice for Prabhupada. And so she found, I forget now the detail, but a particular type of rice that had a particular flavor prepared in a certain way. And she didn't tell Prabhupada that she had gone to this trouble to get this certain rice and prepared it in a certain way. She just prepared it, offered it to her deities, and served it to Prabhupada. Prabhupada took a small morsel, put it on the tip of his tongue, tasted it, and told her the particular brand or type of rice and how it was prepared just by tasting it. Now, how did Prabhupada know that? I mean, he wasn't a connoisseur of tasting things. It just his senses were purified and refined, that he wasn't just doing. Everything he did was devotion, and therefore he knew so many things based upon my point is, his life was a life of simplicity, and in that life of simplicity, it doesn't cancel out complexity or subtleties. And Prabhupada was able to detect one who has devotion it's detectable, everything. How, when you cook or when you serve the deity, or when you do your service, while the life around you is a life of simplicity, the joy is the life of devotion. And the Bhagavatam is leading us into that. And it's not a partiality. Krishna is more kind to one of you than the other one of you because something. It has everything to do with, in that life of simplicity, the regard towards the personality of Godhead. And that's our bhakti life. One can live a bhakti life consistently for periods of time when in fact that there's some happiness within, the happiness in terms of one's relationship with Krishna and the reciprocation that goes on between oneself and your service to Krishna. Then a life of simplicity is conducive for going forward. In bhakti life. So let's see if it's almost an hour. Let's see if there's some discussion. Huh? You're looking to see if there's online questions? That's what you're doing? Okay. Any discussion from the room? Yes. It's always what? Okay. Well, let's do one. Sure. But I know I'm under the protection of Krishna. And so I waver back and forth. If one tracks from the other, or doing it with disturbance to one when you're with the other. Okay, well, the mind is a binary processor, accepting, rejecting. And if you accept this, it implies rejecting that. And if you accept that, it implies rejecting this. That's on the mind platform. So that's what's happening. And the intelligence can see within two things, differences and oneness. Then it's not a accept, reject. It's not a binary processor evaluation. It's a principle-based or intelligence-based discernment. It can be made very simple. It can be made where you get confused. I was told, God is one. So these stages fall in my meditation. So when I get too confused, I just bring that out and post it again. And say, well, God is one. And whether I'm offering service to Krishna or whether I'm offering service to Jesus, God Okay. Let me tell you a story. Some years ago, I was sitting in my office when before I had cell phones, and somebody rang my office phone. And I picked up the phone. As a college student researcher that somehow got my phone number. I don't know how. And they were doing some research on the views of different religions towards Christ. So I was the guinea pig, the Krishna devotee. What's your view on Christ? My first question is, how'd you get my phone number? And then the second was, the response was, I don't know if you're going to like what I have to say. And he said, try me out. I said that just as it says in the Bible that Christ is the Son of God, we see him as the Son of God. There are those that see him as God because he says the Father and I are one. Our understanding of the Father and I are one has everything to do with the same concept that's there in the Vedic text, that the Son is the representative of the Father. And thus, when a son goes somewhere, he's representing his father. In that sense, the Son and the Father are one. But not that in all senses of the terms, the Son is the Father, but is taken as the representative of the Father. And similarly, there are many sons. And those sons that are purely and transparently representing the Father, they're the best representatives of the Son. They're also sons or transparent representatives of God. And I just went on a little bit, and he said, interesting, that what you just said is exactly in Eastern Christianity how they view Christ. I said, what do you mean? I'm unfamiliar with this. He said, in the West, there is this notion that Christ is God. In Eastern Christianity, there's the notion that Christ is of God. And there are many such of God representatives, of which he is one. And there's a oneness between the Son and the Father. I thought that was very interesting. So you and I, having been brought up in Christian family, Christian tradition, have been exposed to that brand, the one over here. Supposing we grew up in another part of the world or something, and the conception was like described. There's more to be said on that topic, but when your intelligence is cleansed by principle, like you gave this example from the Rig Veda, there's many other examples. Eko Bahusham is another one. One became many, but there's one. Became many. Bahu means many. Eka means one. So one becomes many, no problem, because that one is unlimited and can become many, and it's not diminished by. So it's very similar to the Rig Veda mantra that's mentioned. So if the confusion is on the platform of the mind or emotion, this sentiment, that sentiment, and then there's science that can unconfuse the mind. And then here's another way of saying the same thing. This is Badrinarayan Swami saying he heard Prabhupada say this on the Vyasa-san in Los Angeles. A measure of intelligence is the ability to hold two opposite things at the same time. Because when there isn't intelligence, this cancels out that, or that cancels out this. It can't be both. Intelligence is where there's opposite things and one can hold, the intelligence can hold them both at the same time. The mind cannot. So invitation to you is to go to the intelligent platform and not just the mind platform. Intelligence can direct the mind. Intelligence is meant to direct the mind. So, the goal is love. And there's an object of the subject, the object, and the process of love or service. Anything else? Yes. We don't have a microphone, so you got to speak strongly. How can you say it slower now? How can you cultivate? I couldn't, the punchline of your question is important. So I think I got it, but I'm not sure. So how can I cultivate consistency? That's your question. What's it? It's mode of goodness. What interrupts the mode of goodness are the other two guys, passion and ignorance. So how to diminish passion and ignorance is another way of asking your question, because when mode of ignorance and passion are diminished, then there's consistency. It's mode of goodness. So the Bhagavatam, one expression of the Bhagavatam, the modes of ignorance and passion are reduced. Kama lobhadayashi cheta etaranadvitam stitvam sattve prasidati. By the process of going back to the verse prior to that one, Bhagavata Seva, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. The abhadras, the behaviors and influences in the mind, so the mind and body are influenced by the lower modes. That's reduced, those are abhadras, and those abhadras, nashta, prayeshu, abhadreshu, nityam bhagavata sevaya. So that's how. And so when you're looking for consistency, that's mode of goodness. So so supposing one day you're feeling like this, the next day you're feeling like that, not consistent. I do it anyways. Like you may, I know some parents, they have a child that doesn't like to brush their teeth. Maybe that's not one of your problems, but so the very patiently, the parent has to help the child understand it's important to brush your teeth every day. It's important to take a bath every day. It's important to, eat your spinach or whatever it is that the parent is trying to help the child understand by doing something that's wholesome. So by guidance of a parent, then a child can adopt that which is wholesome as opposed to that which is tamas and rajas. So the Bhagavatam, the book and the person are primary assets to go beyond the influence of the unsteadiness or inconsistency due to the influence of the modes. That's the obstacle. The modes interrupt consistency. And we get distracted over here and over there. Lower modes. There's a method, prescribed method. Vinti, So we follow vidhis, whether you're feeling like it or not. And the more that's cleansing, you not only feel like it, but you feel evam prasanna manaso, prasanna, bhagavat bhakti yoga taha, janayati ashu vairagyam. So jnanam cha. So the knowledge and detachment arise from those proper practices. And so be patient while you have two small children trying to regulate yourself and regulate them, and with the inconsistency factor going on inside. It's the modes of nature. You tolerate it. And as far as possible, stay with the regulation. Okay. Recognizing is sometimes going to be better and sometimes it's going to be not as good. But when you tumble and it's not as good as you know it should be, could be, you stand back up again and you keep walking, knowing that nature, the walking nature is there. The tumbling is not natural. The inconsistency is not part of who you are. It's an influence of the lower modes of nature due to long contact. So you tolerate it. Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.